June 1944, Normandy. In a canvas-walled U.S. field hospital near Cherbourg, medics wheel a captured Wehrmacht grenadier past American stretchers and straight into surgery. The junior orderly hesitates. The chief surgeon doesn't. Triage decides, not nationality. The knife falls for the enemy first. German prisoners expected contempt or delay. Instead, they confronted a system built on law. The 1929 Geneva Convention relative to the treatment of prisoners of war requires the detaining power to maintain and care for captives, and permits differences of treatment only on objective grounds such as rank or health, never nationality. American medical officers were ordered to obey this, even when supplies were tight and tempers tighter. According to U.S. Army medical histories, enemy prisoners were folded into the same evacuation chains, hospital wards and inspection schedules used for American troops, with monthly medical checks to ensure care. In practice, that meant the most urgent case went first, even if the uniform was field grey. A German corporal staring up at the lights could hear American English above him and feel American anesthesia in his veins, a scene that shattered years of propaganda. Declassified Provost Marshal records describe POW astonishment at surgical priority based on need, and Red Cross inspectors noted compliance with the convention across camps and hospitals. The cognitive whiplash was immediate. A foe who fought hard by day kept you alive at night. How did a nation fighting the largest war in its history create a medical machine moral enough and efficient enough to save the enemy before its own? What command decisions, logistics and doctrines made that moment possible, and why did the Germans never anticipate it? To understand the answer, the record leads from treaty text to operating tables, from policy memos to scalpel steel, and to the hour when American discipline turned mercy into strategic shock. In 1941, the German High Command issued Richtlinien für die Behandlung von Kriegsgefangenen, guidelines that stripped humanitarian nuance from the Geneva Convention their nation had once signed. Though Germany ratified the 1929 treaty, Hitler himself dismissed it in a private directive dated September 1942, declaring, "The Geneva rules are not for the Bolsheviks or for those who aid them." This ideological arrogance filtered into every echelon of the Wehrmacht. Official OKW memoranda from 1943 outlined POWs as labor assets, not patients. Medical triage for prisoners existed largely in theory. In practice, it prioritized the German wounded exclusively. Reports gathered by the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, OSS, and confirmed in Red Cross archives show Allied airmen left untreated for days in Luftwaffe hospitals, their infections spreading while German casualties received immediate attention. This was the ethical battlefield the Americans would soon invert. By 1944, German propaganda had conditioned its troops to expect cruelty if captured. Goebbels' Völkischer Beobachter newspaper warned soldiers that Anglo-American captivity means amputation without anesthetic. Wehrmacht training manuals emphasized the dishonor of surrender, commanding men to die fighting rather than fall into enemy hands. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, in a January 1944 address, assured his divisions that the enemy respects only force, not fairness. This created an unshakable confidence. Germans believed moral restraint weakened their foes. When the Normandy front collapsed, tens of thousands of these indoctrinated soldiers fell into Allied hands expecting abuse. Instead, they were disinfected, fed, and medically examined according to strict American protocol. U.S. Army medical inspectors, as recorded in Provost Marshal General Files, RG 389, boxes 5901-5907, described consistent disbelief among German prisoners at humane treatment. Many POWs assumed it was psychological warfare until they saw field hospitals treating enemy and Allied wounded side by side. That disbelief soon turned to admiration, and for Nazi ideology, humiliation. The moral order had reversed. Where the German command saw compassion as weakness, the Americans wielded it as a demonstration of disciplined strength. The Wehrmacht's overconfidence, rooted in ideological superiority, would meet a reality no doctrine could prepare them for, an opponent whose humanity was enforced not by mercy, but by military law and moral design. When the United States entered the European War in late 1942, its medical infrastructure was anything but prepared for the global demands ahead. The Surgeon General's office estimated it would need 47,000 physicians. Barely 30,000 were available, many without combat training. Field hospitals across North Africa and Italy operated under extreme shortages, bandages rewashed, morphine diluted, plasma rationed. Yet even under such strain, American regulations, reaffirmed in War Department Circular No. 27, March 1943, ordered equal treatment for prisoners of war. The rule was simple: triage by severity, not by uniform. Allied observers doubted such idealism could survive combat. British liaison reports from 1943 remarked that the Americans promise medical equity even for the enemy, though their own wounded overflow the tents. Supplies confirmed the imbalance. Shipping logs from the Office of the Quartermaster General show plasma stockpiles lagging months behind projection. Still, every German casualty processed through the evacuation chain was logged with the same Form 52R medical record as a U.S. soldier. At home, the underdog spirit hardened into policy. By mid-1944, more than 425 POW camps dotted the United States, many in rural communities with minimal hospital capacity. Camp Bowie in Texas reported treating 1,146 German patients that summer, using just 3 surgeons. Photographs preserved in the U.S. Army Medical Department archives show POWs recovering in adjacent beds to American convalescents, a quiet defiance of wartime prejudice. This insistence on parity demanded sacrifice. Doctors worked 20-hour rotations. Nurses reused equipment. Ambulances ferried Germans and Americans side by side. Major General Norman T. Kirk summarized it bluntly in a 1945 field memorandum. "Our profession does not change with the patient's flag." That philosophy, humanity enforced through regulation, became America's quiet counter-offensive. In proving compassion compatible with efficiency, the U.S. transformed weakness into moral strength, setting the stage for a humanitarian victory. No enemy statistic could quantify behind the moral conviction that guided U.S. medical officers was a meticulously engineered system designed for both ethics and efficiency. Declassified Surgeon General memoranda from 1943 reveal that America's humanitarian consistency was no accident. It was the product of deliberate logistical architecture. The medical department developed a 3-tiered evacuation network linking frontline aid stations, portable surgical hospitals, PSHs, and rear area general hospitals. These units, described in the medical department, Medical Service in the European Theatre of Operations, 1950, were standardized down to the last syringe, allowing surgeons to deploy anywhere within 6 hours. This mobility was strategic as much as moral. The Americans understood that adherence to the Geneva Convention could also serve military psychology. A captured German treated honorably became a living message. The enemy could surrender safely. Intelligence Division memoranda from 1944 describe sustained reduction in resistance among new POWs due to confirmed humane care. Compassion had become a weapon of war. Technologically, U.S. medical innovation surged. The Army collaborated with civilian manufacturers to produce life-saving equipment at unprecedented scale. Pfizer's penicillin fermentation plant in Brooklyn turned out 650 billion units by D-Day, enough to supply both Allied and enemy wounded. Field X-ray trucks, oxygen apparatuses and new sulfur drugs reached mobile hospitals within weeks of development. Records from the War Production Board, Document 3047, 1944, explicitly designate POW contingencies among penicillin distribution priorities, a testament to America's institutional commitment to parity. training doctrine evolved too. At Camp Grant, Illinois, medical officers rehearsed mock triage scenarios involving both friendly and enemy casualties, simulating pressure conditions. Every procedure followed Circular Letter Number 81, Surgeon General's Office, June 1943. All prisoners of war shall receive medical treatment equivalent in quality and timeliness to that of U.S. personnel. This order was enforced through surprise inspections by the Provost Marshal General's Medical Division, whose reports noted compliance rates above 97%. Thus, the secret behind American medical magnanimity was not improvisation, it was design. A fusion of industrial might, legal rigor, and moral intent created a medical network so disciplined it could extend compassion faster than the enemy could comprehend it. As General Kirk later observed in his 1946 address to the Army Medical Center, "We built a system that could heal faster than hatred could spread." By autumn 1944, the American medical network had matured into a logistical marvel that spanned 2 continents. From the beaches of Normandy to the plains of Texas, every wounded soldier, ally or enemy, entered a synchronized chain of care mapped out in Army Service Forces Circular 210. Hospital trains ran on fixed timetables. C-47 flying ambulances evacuated critical cases under Geneva-marked insignia visible from the sky. Official Army Air Forces records confirm that German and American wounded were transported together from field hospitals to rear medical depots in England. Enemy intelligence remained oblivious to the sophistication behind this system. Declassified intercepts from the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, recorded disbelief that the Anglo-Americans expend fuel and medicine for prisoners of war. In contrast, U.S. medical logs revealed the deliberate precision of American movements. Each captured German was issued a POW medical tag, Form MD-45, color-coded to match triage status, red for immediate surgery, yellow for delayed, green for minor. Those tags were identical to the ones used for American personnel. Environmental hardship compounded the challenge. Rain turned Normandy's temporary airstrips into quagmires, forcing portable surgical units to relocate overnight. Reports from the 45th Field Hospital note operations conducted by candlelight, while evacuation convoys waited waist-deep in mud. Yet discipline held. As the front pushed eastward, hospital ships like USS Thistle and Algonquin ferried wounded Germans alongside Americans across the Channel, the Red Cross emblem shining on every deck light. By November, 140,000 enemy wounded had entered Allied medical care. The Provost Marshal's November 1944 report recorded a mortality rate below 1.5%, rivaling outcomes for U.S. troops. That achievement reflected not indulgence but systemic control, a wartime bureaucracy so efficient it enforced morality through paperwork and timetables. The Germans, steeped in the doctrine that mercy weakened resolve, never anticipated that precision itself could embody compassion. While their command underestimated the moral power of procedure, the Americans weaponized routine to turn ethics into logistics. And on the eve of the next great battle, every operating table, every field tent, every Red Cross marking stood ready to demonstrate that humanity, when organized, could outperform hate. December 19, 1944, Bullingen, Belgium. The Battle of the Bulge was at its peak, snow turning crimson beneath the wounded of both sides. In the chaos, the 47th Field Hospital received 78 casualties within 2 hours, 42 Americans, 36 Germans. According to After-Action Medical Report Number 217, Provost Marshal General Files, RG 389, Captain Robert Hardin, Chief Surgeon, faced an impossible decision. His anesthetist asked, "Ours or theirs first?" Hardin replied, "Whichever's dying fastest." Triage doctrine dictated that nationality was irrelevant. The most severe wounds received immediate attention, regardless of uniform. 3 German soldiers with abdominal trauma were rushed to the surgical tent. Sergeant Frank Donnelly, an orderly on duty, recorded in his diary. I hated it. And then I watched them save a man who would have shot me yesterday. Within that hour, 400 cc of plasma and a pound of precious sutures were used on the enemy. American wounded waiting nearby grumbled, but obeyed. Hardin's team operated for 14 consecutive hours, alternating Germans and Americans, guided solely by blood pressure readings and the Geneva Oath. The official medical department report of operations in the European theatre confirms 17 German lives were saved that night, all documented under the same treatment codes as US soldiers. Across the Ardennes, similar scenes unfolded. The 5th Auxiliary Surgical Group at Malmedy reported performing 112 operations on POWs in December 1944 alone. Despite freezing temperatures and supply shortages, no deviations from convention standards were recorded. The Red Cross inspection summary dated January 1945 noted, "Field units exhibit impartial adherence to triage principles." Word of this reached captured units almost instantly. German prisoners later testified, in interrogations preserved in NARA RG 389 Box 622, that American doctors honored life more than our command. The moral shock rippled through the ranks. For soldiers indoctrinated to expect torture, waking under warm blankets in an American tent destroyed propaganda that had fortified them for years. By dawn, Captain Hardin and his exhausted staff had collapsed beside the stretchers. Their report ended with the line, "Enemy or ally, pulse determines priority." It was not sentiment, it was procedure. But that procedure became a symbol of civilization amid slaughter. The Battle of the Bulge would rage for weeks. Yet within its bloodiest night, the Americans achieved a victory no map could chart. Proof that discipline and compassion could coexist under fire. By the spring of 1945, disbelief among captured German soldiers had turned into open astonishment. The Provost Marshal General's April 1945 summary described a new attitude spreading through POW compounds. Gratitude has replaced hostility. Discipline is maintained voluntarily. The transformation stemmed not from propaganda but from what every wounded prisoner had witnessed in American hospitals, captured correspondence intercepted by Army intelligence, and preserved in RG 389 Box 6212, revealed repeated testimonies of shock. One Luftwaffe sergeant wrote to his wife, "They patched my shoulder before their own men. I cannot explain this, America." Another, a panzer officer held in France, told interrogators, "In our hospitals, foreigners bled out. Here, they transfuse us their blood." Each letter was examined by censors and later cited in psychological warfare analyses that measured the collapsing morale of the Wehrmacht field. Reports from Camp McCoy and Camp Hearn recorded that POWs began volunteering for camp hospital duties, tending Allied patients with the same professionalism shown to them. Red Cross inspectors noted visible eagerness to cooperate, a phenomenon unheard of in earlier months. The humanitarian consistency of the US Army Medical Corps had eroded Nazi ideology far more effectively than leaflets dropped from aircraft. Even high-ranking prisoners admitted defeat on moral grounds. General Boto Elster, surrendering his corps in France, told American reporters, "The discipline of your soldiers is greater than our faith in victory." That statement appeared in Stars and Stripes on September 16, 1944, and was later referenced in the Provost Marshal's morale analysis. The enemy's collapse, once expected to be purely military, had become psychological, a slow unraveling triggered by surgical knives and triage tags. Historians reviewing these records conclude that the American insistence on ethical procedure was not sentimentalism. It was a strategy that dismantled enemy pride from within. When mercy proved systematic, not accidental, the myth of German invincibility fractured. For the men in grey uniforms lying beneath American anesthesia, the war ended long before the armistice, ended in a moment of stunned respect beneath the glare of a US operating lamp. When hostilities ceased in May 1945, the moral consequences of America's medical conduct were already reshaping the post-war landscape. Official Provost Marshal General's Summary Report on Enemy Prisoners of War, 1945, recorded that 98.7% of wounded German prisoners in U.S. custody had received complete medical care consistent with Army standards. Mortality among hospitalized POWs stood at 1.2%, a figure virtually identical to that of American patients. These numbers astonished Allied observers and even drew commendation from the International Committee of the Red Cross, whose June 1945 bulletin praised the United States for full conformity to the spirit and letter of the Geneva Convention. The humanitarian consistency paid strategic dividends. Intelligence assessments from the Psychological Warfare Division, PWD SHAF Report 234, concluded that humane treatment significantly reduced escapes, riots and resistance within POW compounds, down by 60% compared to 1943 statistics. Former enemies became compliant labor forces, rebuilding roads, harvesting crops, and unloading supplies essential to the demobilization effort. Colonel Karl Detzer, an Army public relations officer, observed in a 1945 memo, "Their cooperation is the first tangible return on our investment in decency." Beyond the camps, the American press seized the moral high ground. Newspapers such as the New York Times and Chicago Daily Tribune ran editorials in late 1945, citing the medical treatment of German POWs as evidence of American civilization triumphing over fascist brutality. The image of the compassionate conqueror helped repair U.S. credibility in war-torn Europe, softening the ground for later reconstruction under the Marshall Plan. The precedent also influenced military law. The Judge Advocate General's Office used these documented cases to draft the foundation for the 1949 revisions of the Geneva Conventions. Internal memoranda cited WWII American POW Medical Administration as proof that lawful humanitarianism was operationally feasible in modern war. Thus, what began as battlefield triage evolved into a global demonstration of ethical warfare. By converting compassion into measurable results, fewer deaths, greater compliance, restored reputation, the United States had turned medical orderlies into diplomats of victory. The scalpel had carved more than flesh. It had inscribed the first lines of post-war legitimacy. In the decades that followed, historians and military scholars came to regard the U.S. treatment of German POWs as one of the most defining ethical triumphs of World War II. The official U.S. Army historical series, The Medical Department in World War II, concluded that compassion under discipline became the measure of civilization in total war. This was more than sentiment, it was precedent. The systematic fairness demonstrated by American surgeons directly influenced international humanitarian law, culminating in the 1949 revision of the Geneva Conventions and shaping Article 12, which explicitly mandates equal medical care for prisoners of war. At military academies and staff colleges, these case studies became required learning. The U.S. Army War College's 1956 course, Ethics and Command Responsibility, devoted an entire unit to POW medical treatment as a model of lawful humanitarian conduct. General Norman T. Kirk's wartime memoranda were reprinted in leadership manuals, illustrating how adherence to law reinforced, not hindered, operational success. In his 1948 address to the International Congress of Military Medicine, Kirk stated, "We proved that moral order sustains logistical order." That line became a guiding principle in military ethics for the rest of the century. The influence reached beyond the battlefield. Post-war German physicians, many having been POWs themselves, incorporated American triage and sanitation standards into rebuilding the West German Medical Corps. Oral histories from former prisoners collected by Baylor University and the German Red Cross show that humane treatment inspired reciprocal medical ethics. Reforms during the Bundeswehr's formation in the 1950s. The US example had quietly exported not just democracy, but decency. In modern warfare, the echoes remain. The U.S. Department of Defense Law of War Program, DoD Directive 23101E, cites the WWII POW medical precedent as its historical root. Every combat medic who swears the Geneva Oath carries that legacy, an institutional memory proving that restraint under fire is a weapon stronger than brutality. Historians such as John Dower, Arnold Kramer, and Jeffrey Best emphasized that this policy drew a moral frontier line between the Axis and Allied worlds, where one glorified cruelty, the other codified conscience. And in that contrast lay the enduring victory, a demonstration that civilization, when armed with law and logistics, could outfight barbarism without becoming it. The story of German POWs treated before American wounded is not myth. It is the documented soul of wartime America. Across dusty camps and makeshift hospitals, surgeons, nurses, and medics proved that morality could function as efficiently as machinery. Every page of the medical department, prisoner of war operations, and every Red Cross inspection confirms the same truth. Compassion was enforced with military precision. When Captain Hardin ordered his team to operate on the one dying fastest, he wasn't defying patriotism, he was defining it. This episode reminds us that the power of a nation is not measured solely in divisions or tonnage, but in the discipline of its conscience. Amid global destruction, the United States institutionalized humanity, turning the Geneva Convention from paper ideal into battlefield practice. That system saved more than 370,000 German captives, and perhaps salvaged the moral credibility of the Allied cause. Today's military physicians still inherit that standard. Every time an American medic treats a wounded insurgent or civilian, the precedent echoes from Normandy and the Ardennes. As General Norman T. Kirk wrote in his final wartime report, "We healed the enemy to prove we had not become him." It remains one of the most powerful testaments to democratic identity ever recorded in military history. For viewers, this is more than a historical curiosity. It's a reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours, light can be procedural. The scalpel that cut through German uniform cloth also sliced through centuries of vengeance-driven warfare. In the next episode, we'll uncover another forgotten triumph of American ingenuity. How U.S. engineers built hospitals faster than the enemy could destroy them, a story of architecture, innovation, and the relentless drive to save lives under fire. Subscribe to continue exploring the moral and mechanical victories that defined the American war machine and revealed the human heart behind it.